We're here in the beautiful London in the Hotel The Net, and we're here with David Chaum, a very influential guy in this space. David, how are you doing?
Oh, great. Good to meet you here. Yeah.
You just did a keynote at the World Blockchain Forum. How do you look back on it? What were the reactions?
Oh, I heard that people were quite positive about it also online, so yeah, I was happy about that, yeah.
All right. I mean, of course, you're the godfather of digital cash. If we go back to that episode of your life, what was your personal motivation to start it off?
Well, the truth is that I pushed electronic money out into the world hoping that it would get ordinary people to feel that they could control their own privacy and that these keys that their devices created would empower them to protect information about themselves, and then that would expand out beyond just payments and into all kinds of spheres of personal informational life.
And what was the motivation behind that? Behind the thought of having your own data? I mean, is it about independence, or is it about truth, or?
Well, you know, it's a long time ago, and back in those days, it was assumed that computerization would take place, and the big question was, would people have control over their own information, the privacy aspects? Would they be able to, for example, edit the records that companies had? Would they be able to interact without providing identifying information? And could they control, you know, whether companies had access to information about them and so forth? So that was the key issue, because it was assumed that computerization would take place. I felt that if people started to really understand that they could control that access to private information, then yeah, they would be empowered maybe adequately in the upcoming informational age. Perhaps that was a naive perspective, given what I said earlier today in that keynote.
Because if we look at the current situation, we're gonna make a time leap now, but of course now the powers that be actually there's no privacy anymore. I mean,
yeah,
it's dead.
Yeah, that's right. Privacy is pretty much over, but I think now, you see, in those days, people didn't have computers. Companies and governments had the computers. Our biggest hope for people was that they could protect their own privacy, but they would have to leave the heavy computing, heavy lifting to the organizations. Now, people have the vast majority of computing power, actually, and it's possible for people to control, you know, all aspects of their informational lives, like to actually have control over their records about ownership of not only money but everything else, and all the confidentiality of interactions with other people, and so forth. So this is, I think, an expanded potential scope of control by individuals.
So if we look back on the internet, the information, the speed of information, we've seen Wikipedia, we've seen, of course, Linux, but also WikiLeaks, etc. But so can you say it has brought us a lot of things, a lot of prosperity, or also not prosperity, but a lot of good things as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously computerization has dramatically changed the world, and the internet is a kind of potential for a kind of hive mind, if you will. It could be the next really big thing for humanity, but sort of the greed that drove the build out of the internet didn't really leave it structured in a way that allows people to reach their potential using it, and for any kind of really new thing to emerge. So perhaps this blockchain movement can kind of redistribute control over the internet in such a way that it can be a medium for society to reach its potential.
Just one step back. Did you actually realize, or did you expect that this could happen to the internet? I mean, that privacy will be over, and we have these. Yeah, I mean, when the power is bundled in these companies, Silicon Valley companies. Did you expect that, or if you look back?
Well, back in the day, actually, I realized that either these search portals could dominate, or that there might be a micropayment-based kind of internet that would have evolved. And it turned out that the Googles of this world took over. That's a bit unfortunate. Just part of the whole sort of greed-driven build-out of cyberspace, sort of ignoring human potential and the power of information technology to greatly amplify people's lives, and rather, it was just sort of a piecemeal build out of short-term opportunities.
And can we expect the same of this blockchain movement? I mean, or do you see parallels? I mean, we can hope for distributed power or distributed information, distributed data. What is it going to happen? I mean, or is the greed taking over? Or
well, it's. I mean, of course, there's a lot of it's an astounding amount of greed and we see in the blockchain space, but it seems to be dwarfed by the overall enthusiasm and I think clear-sightedness about what the key attributes that are needed are. So I don't think that it makes sense to think of blockchain as going off in a poor direction and just being more of the same. I mean, it's either going to make it and conform to its own distributed ethos, or it's going to remain a very limited kind of, investment medium. That's the way I see it.
And if you look at Ethereum, for instance, do you see a parallel between Ethereum and Netscape, for instance, or is it no parallel at all? I mean, it's this virtual machine creating money.
I have to apologize. I don't have much reservation or pessimism about the blockchain world. I mean, I have noticed that in the last year or so, a lot of people that I, speak to seem to regard things like Ethereum as kind of set in stone establishment, somehow the dominant standards that need to be respected. I don't feel that way personally, with all due respect to all the effort that's gone into them. I see it as a space where the best things can win, and I'm not really worried about the power of incumbency, because the incumbents are very much constrained in the kind of activities that they can do. So my hope for the new blockchain is a much more expanded scope. So what I said this morning in my keynote is that in order for blockchain to really advance to the next level, it has to its main chance is to break through and become a global payment system, a medium of exchange. It has to get out of the store of value mode. And I think if it succeeds to do that, it will encompass both payments and messaging, because they are intimately related, and that will give it a global footprint and adoption level that will allow it to dictate its own terms as far as what other services are added.
So the future is in the dApps, the dApps, the application side. I mean the killer apps. I mean the Farmville of blockchain. Or
well, I mean that that is a possibility. My view is again that blockchain will either stay a kind of limited store of value type of a thing in the unpermissioned space. Permissioned blockchains, that's another matter. But in the unpermissioned space, either it can stay the way it is, or kind of its main chance is to break through and go mainstream in terms of messaging and payments. If it can get beyond being a store of value and become a payment system and a messaging system, then it can kind of own the market, and all kinds of other facilities and dApps can be added on. That's the way I see it.
And what are the ingredients for success? That's scalability, speed of transactions, or perhaps?
Yes. Yeah. Well, no, that's right. The scalability has to. There's 500 billion payments globally that are electronic. That's quite a big scale, and because of smartphones, the consumers have come to expect that a message or a payment will be completed within something like 10 seconds. And so that places a pretty high bar. No current system realistically can achieve anything like that, especially without data centers. Just by using server class machines as nodes, you're going to need a real revolution in the way the cryptography is done. It's not just going to be rearranging the existing approach. It's going to take a real breakthrough. But I think there's also privacy. And if you look at the privacy coins today, I mean, their performance is way, way less than other systems. So, but I do believe that some level of privacy is going to be needed for a widespread adoption, and I think the kind of privacy that people will insist on is not a kind of limited privacy, but really true privacy, which includes both unlinking the physical network address of the payer from the transaction and unlinking transactions to other transactions. And truth be told, we haven't really seen that level of privacy in the blockchain space. And I think there's a fourth thing, which is I'd really like to see. You know, governments have inhibited the adoption of blockchain and wasted a tons of money by this which, in my opinion, crazy, misguided idea that they must be able to spy on everyone, and that you know, predominates and has inhibited the adoption of these superior mechanisms. But I think they have been absolutely irresponsible in that and completely asleep at the wheel, because the real thing that they should be doing, that government needs to do, is to protect society against systemic risk. And so if you have a global payments and messaging system, what governments should be doing is making sure that there's no what we call a rapid unanticipated mode of attack, like that it's not based on weak types of cryptography, like, in my opinion, elliptic curves, or and also things that might be subject to attack if and when suitable quantum computers or other specialized hardware is built. So really, we need something that's much more solid, and that should be the focus of government, to protect society against the collapse of the payment system, because, you know, it's civilians that will suffer dramatically. This would be devastating if you know, people wouldn't be able to buy food. I mean, society would fall apart if there was a dominant payment system and then it collapsed. So I think that's really what government should be focusing on.
And if we look at this disruption side, I mean, of course, the finance sector is actually the first sector. Players like, for instance, Western Union or MoneyGram. What would you do if you were the CEO of Western Union, of MoneyGram or MoneyGram? I mean, their business gets disrupted quite heavily.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's been a good run for those guys. You know, they're making an egregious amount of money off poor, hardworking poor people, and it's you know, it's a real crime. And even the IMF tried to move against them and install these 5% limits and so on. They have this whole program, but didn't really stop them. So I don't, you know, think that somehow they are really the key players any longer, because I think they're being disintermediated all kinds of ways by various blockchain technologies and other payment systems. So if I was the CEO of one of those companies, yeah, I guess the thing to do would be to try to, you know, what do they call it? Join the witness protection program. Try to get a new identity and live somewhere else, because, you know, it's really a crime against humanity. I mean, it's a horrible thing that they've been perpetrating.
Or they can adapt a blockchain technology like Ripple, for instance.
Well, yeah. Well, you know, the history of business is shocking in the rarity of major enterprises adopting anything that would, in the slightest way, interfere with their cash cow phase. It's really quite stunning when you look at it. I guess now companies like Amazon, because of their really progressive management techniques, are starting to break that pattern. But generally, it's been almost unheard of that a company would change its business model in order to adopt a disruptive or competing technology. I mean, there's a lot of more sophisticated analysis about this these days, because internally financed projects have different time scales and different kinds of expected returns, and so you can understand this better. But I don't think that those aren't really the major players anymore. And
what do you see, sorry, as the major player? What do you see? I mean, if you look at the big ones, it's like Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan. I mean, these are the big guys.
Yeah, well, I mean, the money center banks, I mean, those are huge players, and then central banks are also not to be ignored. So yeah, I mean, I think the MoneyGram and those people are small actors in this space.
What would you do if you were like, it's just a new CEO, but if you were the CEO of Goldman Sachs, what would you do in his position, for instance? Yeah, it's a bit.
I don't know how much of Goldman Sachs's activity really directly relates to the potential of blockchain. So it's hard for me to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have invested in Circle, for instance. Circle, this startup, yes. and but maybe we only have 5 minutes. So this could be very disruptive. Do you actually have some projects in this space that you like, that you are favorite coins or favorite projects? We've talked about Ethereum, of course you have Bitcoin. Are there some favorites or interesting technology-wise? Or
I think there's, two new shoes to drop, and we haven't really seen much about them yet. One is a way to run dApps that have actual private data properly secured in them, and the second way would be a kind of blockchain that can really take over global payments and messaging.
All right. So and they don't exist yet. I mean, you have Monero, you have Zcash, you have the privacy coins, but they're not there yet.
Well, I'm afraid that those technologies, at least, really are the least capable of scaling to the kind of global dominance that's needed. But the features that they include may be somewhat improved, I believe, will be needed to make something that's really attractive to consumers. So what we need is a whole new approach that's I think has to be based on some breakthrough technology, but I do believe it's possible.
And it's actually a technology or company that doesn't exist now. I mean, there's more capital needed, there's more brains needed to create those two new shoes.
It's hard to know what's out there at this moment, but I think if those new shoes were to present themselves and to be welcomed by the community, there's a lot of potential upside.
All right. to conclude, I mean, I saw your YouTube video yesterday and about this distributed keynote you gave, and actually, I didn't see a frustrated guy. I mean, you are the godfather of DigiCash, but in the end, you aren't frustrated that this grand idea wasn't implemented at that time, or frustrated, or perhaps I'm wrong, but
well, I guess I've seen it over and over again that just because you have a technology that's advantageous to consumers doesn't mean that the powers that be are going to be anxious to widely adopt it. You know, they have their own program and objectives, and if it doesn't fit squarely within them, then they're going to go off in their own direction. I saw that with eCash. You know, when I stopped pushing it, it more or less disappeared, even though it was clearly advantageous to consumers because they held this digital money. It was in their possession and it protected their privacy. And I saw a similar thing in the election space. My company at the time built really superior voting systems according to the surveys. The voters liked them a lot. They were less expensive. They were far more secure because they were publicly verifiable. Anyone could audit the election from afar. And yet, election officials were hardly interested, even though we'd proven the success of this in actual elections and so on. So
in the Netherlands, you have a special thing with the Netherlands. You were based in the Netherlands. You had a company in the Netherlands,
yes.
DigiCash.
Yes. Well, voting in the Netherlands is a bit of a special case, and I think you have some I don't know what the exact word is, but people who feel that voting in the Netherlands should only be by the most traditional paper-based means, and that there's no obligation whatsoever for the Netherlands to set an example for how other countries might be able to better run their elections. And I think that's unfortunate. I think that any country that's involved in voting systems should try to make the absolute best example of how they run elections, to try to promulgate their ideas globally. But
you also experienced in the Netherlands like a block for this idea. I mean, there was no.
Well, I think, it's quite ironic, and I don't want to get too deep in it, but, when I lived in the Netherlands, there were this sort of seemingly very progressive groups of activists, and they were, let's say, in Dutch English, busy showing that the Dutch telecom was really foolish in its, and clumsy in its ability to secure things and anticipate security issues and so forth. They made great fun of many of the institutions in the Netherlands, and so in this way they gave the impression that they were really pursuing a higher cause. But then later it turned out that they sold out. All the systems that were built by volunteers and activists trying to make a better world were sold out by their leaders for money so they could buy their own grachtenpads, and and then those very same people, not only did they betray the spirit and the whole concept, but then they turned very reactionary against any kind of progressive use of technology to set a better example for the rest of the world. So, you know, it was a bit disappointing for me to experience this and to have to deal with sort of a backlash from these groups. But, you know, it's not unlike a lot of phenomena that you see in the world. You know, people are a lot more progressive when they're in college than when they're, you know, married with kids, right? It's, you know, you see this kind of a thing. But I think that all of these technologies hold tremendous promise to make the world an extraordinarily better place. And I'm not giving up on trying to see how to really push all of this forward.
All right. Thank you very much, David, for your time, and all the best with all the things you gonna entrepreneur. Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
thank you.
Very pleasure. Thanks for coming.